Good afternoon. Before we start with the main presentation, I'd just like to quickly remind you that you can share your feedback and engage with the Hayes Salary Guide conversation on social media. Simply follow us on Twitter at Hayes News or connect with us on Facebook or LinkedIn and use the hashtag @HayesSalaryGuide. So welcome to our webinar and thank you for joining us. My name's Karen Young from Hayes and I'm delighted to welcome you to the launch of our latest salary guide. By way of a brief introduction, I'm responsible for our UK Accountancy and Finance recruitment business at Hayes, and that's over 400 recruitment consultants, all specialising in some form of finance recruitment and operating from a footprint of nearly 100 offices around the UK. I have over 20 years of experience in recruiting in this particular area. I'm delighted to be joined today by Rosemary Lemon, who's Group Head of Reward at Hayes. And I will be first taking you through the findings from our 2018 Salary and Recruiting Trends Guide, and then I'll be handing over to Rosemary, who's going to give insight into our changing world of work and how that relates specifically to reward and benefits, because we do have to remind ourselves that sometimes it's not all about the money, money, money. Just a reminder that you can type questions at any time during the webinar, and we'll spend a few minutes at the end going over some of these if you just use the Q&A function. To start, I'd like to give you a little bit of background on this report. This is the 5th year we've produced our UK guide, and it covers over 12 specialist skills and technical areas supported by regional salary data for most roles. It's based on salary information provided by 1,800 recruiting experts from our 93 UK offices. As well as using our own extensive insight to inform the guide, we also launched a survey designed to ascertain employee satisfaction, employer concerns, and to gather general insight into the market. And this secured a staggering almost 23,000 responses from both employers and employees, of which I'm pleased to say nearly 3,500 came specifically from accountancy and finance professionals from the world that I live in. So to start, let's set the scene by quickly recapping the overall findings from last year's report, because it's important to set things in context. Across all professions, sectors and industries last year, 59% of organisations expected their business activity to increase, 71% said they were planning to recruit, and there was a 1.8% average salary increase, and 55% of employees said they were considering moving jobs in the coming 12 months. This year, against a backdrop of continued economic and political uncertainty, hiring plans, which are at the highest since our survey began 5 years ago, appear to be under threat by skills shortages in what is certainly an increasingly competitive labour market. So let's have a look at what the survey results showed in more detail. So to start with the positives, there's obviously ongoing uncertainty, and employers' business outlook actually, despite that, remains robust, and employers are telling us they're optimistic about the market and their businesses. Overall, there's been an increase in the number of UK employers across all specialisms and sectors this year predicting growth, with 62% of employers forecasting an increase to business activity levels back in 2016, which was obviously pre the EU referendum, and 57% immediately the year after, 59% last year, and now back up to 61%, as you can see on the slide in front of you. And consistent with last year, only 5% expecting a decrease in activity. This is all good news and shows that employers are optimistic about business activity in spite of the continued political and economic uncertainty surrounding the outcome of Brexit negotiations, and aren't we in the thick of that at the moment? This optimism does suggest organisations do remain focused on the opportunities ahead and resilient regardless of wider market uncertainty. Looking specifically then at accountancy and finance, we can see that employers are marginally less optimistic than the UK average, with 57% predicting an increase in activity levels compared to the national average of 61%. However, I should note that this is a 5% increase from the year before, and still a pretty positive sentiment overall. And overall, this optimism is also translating into increased hiring plans, with employers continuing to invest in their recruitment and their talent management strategies. Recruitment clearly remains a priority for employers, 76% across the UK saying that they do plan to hire in the next 12 months. And in fact, as you can see here, this is the highest percentage that we've recorded in the 5 years that we've been running our report. However, when looking at the recruitment plans of accountancy and finance employers only, this figure is notably lower than the national average, with 56% telling us that you plan to recruit staff over the next year. But is on a par with last year, when 57% said they'd be recruiting. And it's not entirely unexpected from the accountancy and finance world, where we're seeing more and more that recruitment is often for different new skills into an organisation, and not necessarily ever going to be a big increase in headcount, unlike some of my other colleagues at Hayes in perhaps the tech and digital marketing world. Of those accountancy and finance employers looking to hire, 46% state they plan to hire permanent staff, while 22% plan to hire temporary, contract or interim staff. And this is roughly, again, on a par with the hiring plans of accountancy and finance employers last year. Despite positive business activity and hiring outlook, employers are faced with big recruitment challenges. The vast majority of UK employers are in agreement that the talent market is at its most competitive for some time. And what does that really mean if you're an organisation out there looking to hire? Well, 92% of UK employers say they did experience skills shortages in the last year, not only in recruitment but in their business overall. And this is roughly on a par with the sentiments of accountancy and finance employers, as you can see there, with 89% saying that they have experienced skills shortages in the past year. 78% of these accountancy and finance employers have experienced difficulty hiring permanent staff, and 60% reported challenges hiring temporary or contract staff. And this is on a level with the overall UK averages, which also saw 78% of employers experiencing difficulty hiring permanent employees, and 63% experiencing difficulty hiring temporary employees. So where are the skills shortages? Well, the skills shortages are apparent across many different areas. Not surprisingly, the technical finance piece there, operations, managerial and leadership skills are most needed by accountancy and finance employers this year. And the projects and change management piece there is also interesting. In our report, What's Challenging Finance Leaders, that we launched in the autumn this year, most finance directors and CFOs cited change management as their biggest challenge in their organisations ahead over the next 12 months. And you can request a copy of that report online if you're interested. So 42% of accountancy and finance employers also expressed increased concern about competition from other employers. And this is a significant increase from 31% last year, but marginally below the UK average, as you can see there. Actually, tech and legal employers expressed the most concern about this. And these hiring challenges look set to continue, as 68% of accountancy and finance employers expect to experience a shortage of suitable applicants when recruiting over the next 12 months. The importance of effective recruitment and retention plans is therefore apparent, as 28% of people, of employers, don't believe that they have the talent needed to achieve their current business objectives, an increase from 21% last year. And I always find that this is one of the most concerning findings from this report. We all need good people. We all need the right skill sets to ensure that our organisations can flourish and prosper. So it's therefore not surprising that the consequence of these ongoing skills shortages is being felt in both employee morale and workplace productivity. Over 2/5 of accountancy and finance employers reported that skills shortages have had a negative impact on employee morale, a slight increase of just 2% from last year. But even more accountancy and finance employers say skills shortages have had a negative impact on productivity in their organisation. And what other impacts are there? Well, you can see on the right-hand side, 41% also reporting a negative impact on their ability to deliver projects, and 25% saying skills shortages are adversely affecting their organisation's ability to provide a good service to their customers. So it probably won't surprise you then that as a result of this competitive environment and an urgent need to address the skills gap, that there is continued pressure on employers to boost salaries. The overall average increase in salaries, I already told you, for the UK was 1.9%, but in areas of increased skill shortages, pay rises have been higher. And the overall average increase in salaries for accountancy and finance professionals, the average, is similar at 1.8%. But if you are an employer, don't let this let you rest on your laurels. That's the average, but as you'll see shortly, there are some job functions and some regions in the UK within accountancy that have seen far more significant salary inflation. And my message is that it is extremely important to individually benchmark each job in a specific geographical area. And that's what at Hays we're here to help you to do, and which a full copy of the guide will also help you to do. And also in the past year, accountancy and finance employers increased salaries at a greater rate than they predicted that they were going to do, which is also interesting. 81% told us that they increased salaries in the last 12 months, which is higher than the 77% who expected to when we asked this same question last year. And also, interestingly, accountancy and finance employers were higher than the national average of 73% on this aspect. And pay rises were also larger than anticipated. 32% of accountancy and finance employers told us that they increased salaries by over 2.5%, compared to just the 22% who planned to. And this is, of course, countered by many who were unable to deliver increases, or if they did, they were much lower increases to their teams. So where have the hotspots been? Regional hotspots for accountancy and finance increases, as you can see there, above the average that came out of the guide, were in the southwest, the east of England, Northern Ireland. Comparatively, London overall saw just rises of just 1.5%, but of course still commanded by far the highest salaries overall in pounds and pence terms, so arguably haven't had so far to move. Interesting thing for me is that, as you can see there, accounts payable, payroll and accountancy support saw some of the highest rises, showing that transactional finance skills have been very much still in demand over the last 12 months. And I find this particularly interesting given the discussions that we're having around the role of automation and AI and machine learning. The reality is at the moment, robots are not yet really impacting particularly small to medium-sized businesses, the majority of UK PLC, if you like, and nor do I actually personally think it will do within certainly the next 12 to 24 months, but I do think there will be impact beyond that. But interesting to see that the transactional finance increases there. And as you can see, certain job roles also saw very notable spikes in salaries, including operational tax manager, accounts payable team leaders, and accounts assistants. The accounts assistant job remains one of the most frequently registered and recruited jobs within finance at Hays here in the UK. So if there's such competition and demand, it does explain some of the pay inflation. Payroll continues to be on the agenda. As a function, it's had some of the highest pay inflation over the last few years. So it's really not a surprise to me to see the payroll administrator job function here, and again with that sort of salary increase. And tax, of course, continues to be a high-profile, visible profession that's facing significant change and challenges as organisations prepare for an unknown Brexit, have things like making tax digital coming into business next year as well. So taking for a moment a sort of deeper dive into two or three of the areas. Firstly, the accounting professions, so public practice and taxation. And there's just a few areas here that we've pulled out. General continued demand in insolvency and corporate recovery, which we saw an increase in terms of demand during the downturn, and then it flattened a little, but there's certainly been a lot more movement over the last 12 months. I think as well, there's some even more hotspots than these UK trends show. General practice, for example, in the east of England rose at 3.5% versus the national average. And actually in-house tax saw an average increase of 2.2%, fueled mainly by more demand, again, in navigating through tax, corporate tax pieces, Brexit, making tax digital. And the market, so in some places, for example, a territory like Wales may have seen maybe a smaller area, but has seen sizable increases, for example, in corporate finance. And it's an example of where a smaller geographical area can sometimes be impacted quite quickly in the professional sphere by a significant number of, say, senior personnel reaching retirement. So there's a few interesting things there that I'd choose to pull out. And then looking at the high-performing roles and continuing within professional services, here are a few of them on the slide in front of you. And as you can see here, there's inflation coming through above that average increase for the manager and director positions. And again, these are above that overall average figure that we looked at earlier. So transactional finance, we already had a quick snapshot of that, but if we look at the transactional non-qualified finance area, we already know that accounts payable and accounts assistant roles have had higher pay inflation. Particularly I'd pull out in areas where there's maybe been a higher concentration of relocation or setup of shared service centres or global business centres, not least in areas like Northern Ireland, the North West and the South West. In comparison, London seeing a 1% increase versus those regions which have seen between sort of 6 and 11% in transactional finance. And I think the trend's also reflected in credit management. So in Northern Ireland, we've seen a 7.3% increase and a 6.9% increase in the North West. Again, potentially with those regions certainly playing some catch-up when skills are in demand, competing with other regions around the UK. And you can see now again in front of you some of the high-performing actual job roles, which I'll just let you digest. And finally, to qualified accountancy appointments, so an average of 2.2% increase here, but with some regions even higher than that, Northwest at 4%, Southwest at 4%, Scotland at 3.7%. And we continue to see the demand for profit and loss revenue-focused headcount, certainly by the jobs registered. You can see the focus on analysts there, FP&A, all seeing good increases and higher than average pay increases. Also, not a surprise there to see the recently qualified piece coming through. There's been quite a lot of investment and movement at financial controller level. Again, movement over the last 12 months, in part creating the pounds inflation that you see there in front of you. So there's a lot more information by region and by job function within the guide itself, but that's just a bit of a deep dive into some of the individual areas. And finally, just for interest, as a quick point of comparison, those professional areas that have seen the highest salary increases over the last year are legal and construction and property. Both have seen an average salary increase of 2.7% and HR an average increase of 2.1%. So if colleagues in your organisation come knocking asking for increases for their teams, it could be useful knowledge. I know that many of you do request copies of our full guide for this very reason, especially if you are a finance director or CFO and you have some say over the payroll budget. It's quite a useful thing to have. Okay, so the result of these salary increases has been generally a higher level of salary satisfaction amongst employees. 66% of employees telling us that they're pretty happy with their salaries compared to just 46% last year. So that's quite a significant shift. And there's also been a drop in the number of requests for pay rises. Only 26% of accountancy and finance employees tell us that they asked for a pay rise in the last 12 months compared to 31% the year before. And despite some organisations giving higher pay rises than they perhaps expected and this perceived greater salary satisfaction, I said it's not all about the money, but salary does remain the biggest motivator for employees to change jobs. Overall, UK employees' intentions to change jobs remains consistent with last year, with over half at 56% saying they do expect to move jobs within the next 12 months. And looking back at the last 12 months, 36% of accountancy and finance professionals say that they did change jobs in the last year, and an additional 44% told us that they considered it. And this shows an openness to move from candidates and, if you like, a total talent pool of 80% in the market, both active and passive, that can be harnessed by accountancy and finance employers to address talent challenges, which is clearly opportunity, but of course on the reverse it's also risk, because you do have to work even harder to keep those individuals. And with that in mind, of the 36% of accountancy and finance professionals who say they did move jobs in the last year, the most common reason given still was because their salary was too low. And amongst those who do not currently intend to move roles this year, a massive 40% still admit that they could be tempted with a better salary and, importantly, reward and benefits package, and Rosemary will obviously come on to that shortly. So while the importance of effective talent attraction is apparent, so too are retention strategies. Existing employees have needs and, if you like, demands. So what are people looking for? For example, employee movement due to salaries may be fueled by a mismatch in understanding and expectations around pay. So 78% of employees said it's important that their organisation is transparent about how pay levels and pay rises are set, but only 33% feel that this is currently the case. And also, interestingly, another driver of movement this year for accountancy and finance employees appears to be around career prospects, as it was last year too, with over half of accountancy and finance employees telling us that they feel uncertain, sometimes negative, about their career prospects in their current organisation. And sadly, this has gone up from last year by 3%. So why is that important? Well, it's because career progression is one of the main reasons people tell us that they plan to move jobs. So therefore, if you really can't throw more cash into the pot, consider how you could maybe be more effective in your organisation at recruitment and ongoing basis, at communicating to your talent pool the career paths potentially available to them, and it really may help retain them. And also, employers continue to underestimate the appeal and indeed importance of offering a positive work-life balance to prospective employees and the value that this can have as a tactic in competing for talent. Only 18% of accountancy and finance employers think work-life balance is important for attracting staff, but 32% of professionals prioritise it when coming to the market to consider a new job. Also, the number of employees rating their work-life balance as very poor to average has remained fairly static at 41%, just a little bit lower than the overall figure for the UK, which is 45%. So there's definitely potential for employers to appeal to those people that are seeking a more positive balance. And the main request here is a change in working hours, including adopting flexible working. So whilst that you might be concerned about the impact of changing working hours if you're already struggling with some skills and staff shortages, actually offering and promoting these options can be a really valuable aid to attraction and retention. And also benefits that aid work-life balance and over-average holiday entitlement, for example, are also attractive to employees. But I'll let Rosemary go on to that shortly. So it's been a fairly whistle-stop tour of some of our key survey findings, and I'll just take a few moments now to summarise the key findings of our report before I hand over to Rosemary. So firstly, we've seen that despite the wider uncertainty caused by the ongoing Brexit negotiations, employer confidence in activity for the year ahead remains positive. As a result, recruitment remains a top priority for most organisations, reaching the highest level since our survey began 5 years ago. But continued skills shortages are exacerbated by increased competition from other employers, and that looks set to continue to be a key challenge in the year ahead. And this could impact negatively on employee morale and productivity unless managed, and employers are telling us they're worried about this. Yes, salaries are on the rise, but employees are still tempted to move role for a higher salary and benefits package. And it's clear that there is a significant active and passive talent pool that employers can engage with, but there is a need to offer the right salary, the right environment, the right career path, the right benefits, as well as a positive work-life balance. And it's a reminder, therefore, that the need to look after your staff in this. And now to our simple recommendations. Standing out is essential in today's market. Employers may once have looked to the same handful of companies as their competition for staff, your kind of known competitors, if you like. But employees today are juggling multiple options out there in the market. It could be freelance work or self-employment. It could be joining a really promising startup in an emerging sector. It could be changing their skill set with training offered by another employer. It can be global opportunities as the world becomes more globalized in the world of work. So if you're an employer, you need to be on the front foot and lead with a strong offer of carefully benchmarked salary, but as importantly, career potential and career path, and a really seamless applicant experience if you want to attract the best people in today's market. Last year, 42% of people moved jobs and another 40% considered it. And that's real openness from candidates to move roles for the right offer. So being clear about what makes you stand out as an employer, from salary and benefits to flexible working options, will help you appeal to those waiting for that perfect opportunity to move, who can be perhaps spoilt for choice in today's market. And as 92% of employers, you heard earlier, have experienced skills shortages, and 68% say that their top recruitment challenge is a shortage of suitable applicants, employers will need more creative approaches to tackling these difficulties. Under a fifth of employers experiencing skills shortages had responded by increasing training budgets, which was actually down on last year, and that suggests there's more employers can do to address immediate skills gaps, perhaps with greater investment in training. And also hiring for potential and future capability in someone rather than just the experience on the CV. Investing in internal development programs would not only address skills gap, but also to help mitigate the negative impact on employee morale associated with staff shortages, helping to show and provide career development opportunities that we know employees are seeking. And finally, as skills shortages intensify, looking for talent in the same places every single time isn't really a reliable strategy anymore. You can, as an employer, widen your talent pool. You can look at different sources that pertain to diverse populations of talent, and online application processes that reinforce internal biases can really result in the loss of some really good quality candidates. So from practical things like ensuring that your recruitment materials really portray your organisation's commitment to diversity and inclusion, to implementing specific recruitment campaigns that directly attract talent from traditionally underrepresented groups, to be competitive in today's marketplace, employers must review their attraction strategy, I think, through that diversity and inclusion lens. So that's it from me. I'm now going to hand you over to Rosemary, our Group Head of Reward at Hays, to share her thoughts and expertise around the outside salary bit, around reward and benefits. Rosemary, I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you very much, Karen, and good afternoon, everybody. I think what Karen has been saying about the importance of attracting talent when that talent is getting rare is really important for all of us. And what I'm going to talk about this afternoon is how benefits can play a really important role in attracting employees. I'm also going to talk about the changing world of work, because that has a big impact in what we can do to help our employees, because they are facing completely new challenges these days from certainly when I started to work. And some steps that we can practically take that don't involve too much money and too much resource, which are some of the things that I hear quite frequently. So I'm going to start by going back to basics on benefits. I think it's quite important because benefits tend to sit on the internet and be there for years and years, and we need to see really what their purpose is. All of us want to attract and retain the best people in the market, and we want those people to be appropriately fit, we want them to be at work, and we want them to be engaged with our business. And if they're engaged with our business in that way, then they're producing the best for us. And benefits play a very important role in this. They're also extremely expensive to provide, and I don't know if you've ever added up the cost of your benefits, but if you look particularly at company pension contributions, the cost of private health insurance premiums and life insurance premiums, you're looking at a cost of millions of pounds each year. And like any other business proposition, you need a return on investment. Your employees need to appreciate them, they need to value them, and very importantly, they need to use them for the purpose that you intend them to be used for. Therefore, we need to, as employers, keep pace with the pressure points in society that impact employees to ensure that our benefits are completely relevant and up to date. And this is not about being paternalistic. The idea here is that it's a win-win situation for everybody. Employees become engaged with your business and produce and are more productive for you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the changing world of work and what sort of things companies now need to be aware of. And I've divided these into 6 areas. So the first is financial. People are definitely needing more money, and this is not just about increase in salaries that Karen mentioned earlier. Our graduates are leaving university with student debt. They've struggled to get onto the property market, and therefore they've got a lack of equity behind them. They have faced high rents, particularly in some of our major cities. Most people have credit card debt. Across the UK, the average credit card debt is about £3,000, and they have a lack of savings. And I don't know if you've ever looked on the Legal & General website. They do a very good report called Deadline to the Breadline, and it shows that if somebody lost their job tomorrow, the average person only has £200 in savings, and that's not a lot to live on. And there's a big pressure on pensions. People are not saving enough, and with the lack of equity in housing, we're storing up a problem for the future. In addition, we have technology changes, and Karen mentioned how robotics are coming into play, artificial intelligence, big data, new jobs are being created, and the speed of communications and information is just vast. And I've got some really interesting statistics. For example, in 1984, only 1,000 people had access to the internet. Today, it's over 30 billion. I looked at the time it takes to reach a market audience of 50 million people. For radio, it was 38 years. For television, 13 years. For the internet, 4 years. For the iPhone, 3 years. And for that game called Pokemon Go that came onto the market a little while ago, it only took 19 days to reach an audience of 50 million people. A week's worth of the New York Times contains more information than a person was likely to come across in a lifetime during the 18th century. There are 5.9 billion searches on Google each day. 91% of smartphone users turn to their phones for answers when doing a task, and importantly for all of us who recruit millennials, 67% of millennials use YouTube when they need to learn how to do something. That says something about how we need to perhaps think of communicating with our employees. In a 4-year engineering degree, half of what students learn in their first year will be out of date by the time they graduate. And jobs like social media, app developers, data scientists, sustainability managers didn't exist 10 years ago. They say that 65% of today's school children will hold jobs that don't yet exist using technology that hasn't yet been invented to solve problems we don't yet know about. So you can see that technology is moving so fast, and it's very important that we keep pace with how our young people and our young employees coming in actually like to work. We're also living longer, and that means we're going to have longer working lives. They say that half of children born in the 1990s will now live to be over 100, and that means that our working life is moving from an average of 30 to 35 years, and it will be now 40 to 50 years. So how will people want to invest in the second part of their lives? Our work-life balance is going to become more important, health and stamina, and people want to work to live these days. They don't want to live to work. And so it's important that we actually look at what sort of benefits we have to help in that transition and that increasingly wide demographic. People are also going to have portfolio careers, and we have to look at what employees now want. They've moved from having the same job for life in one company to having the same job in several different companies, and now in the future they may want different jobs and career breaks throughout their working life. And that presents a challenge to all of us. How do we attract and retain that talent when people want to move around and have career breaks and travel, and then come back and perhaps want to do something completely different? And finally, the social and environmental responsibility. Employees now value a company's values and their ethics and their culture. And when you choose a company, you choose a lifestyle. They say that people now no longer just want to work for the best company in the world, but the best company for the world. And therefore that social purpose and that CSR agenda are becoming increasingly important in attracting employees. So what does this mean for employee benefits? Well, one size certainly no longer fits all. These external social issues are impacting employees and therefore by default are companies. And traditional benefits need to sit alongside other new ones. And in order to capture the talent that Karen spoke about, we as companies need to act now. We can't afford to wait. Certainly when I'm going around presenting and talking to people, the companies face certain dilemmas. And what I hear very frequently is, how much should we trespass into employees' personal lives? And the excuses I hear is just not our concern. I hear, how much will it cost? Because we don't have the budget. How much resource will we need? Because people don't have enough resource of people or time. And finally, what should we be doing? The whole area is so vast that it's very difficult to know where to start. And I'm hoping that during the rest of this presentation I can show you a little bit about how some of the things that are practically possible to do. There is certainly a mindset change needed, and this is certainly not about being paternalistic or interfering in somebody's personal life. I think in the past companies were paternalistic. People had jobs for life. They didn't really have to think too much about their futures because the company provided. And then companies took a step back and they said, well, defined benefit pension plans are very expensive. We're going to move to a different sort of pension plan. And they took a complete step back, passed the risks to employees, and it just didn't work. It's a little bit like raising children. If you let them go too early without giving them some information, it's very difficult for people to be successful. And so this is about nurturing. It's about a duty of care. If we're going to auto-enroll people into pension plans, we need to give them enough information to make informed decisions. And it doesn't have to cost a lot, and it doesn't require a massive resource. You can start very small, and it's a win-win situation. So, the first thing you can do is actually take the pulse of your employees. And I certainly find this when I sit in a group head office. It's very easy to become divorced from your employee population. And it's important to go out there and actually talk to them and see what it is that is important to them. So I'm very lucky in the Hayes head office that we have a group of young millennials actually in our marketing and brand team, and they're very good. They help me out when I have lots of questions for them. So I took a little millennial pulse survey, and these are some of the questions I asked and some of the results that I got. I asked the question, what were the most important things you wanted from a company when you were looking for a job? And they replied, opportunity for progression, a company that invests time with their staff, reputation of the company in the public eye, feeling comfortable when I'm there, diversity, good work-life balance, an intellectual stimulating role, a good company structure, an opportunity for progression. So you can see here that all our value propositions have to be stronger. You have to ask the question, why would anybody want to join your company? And benefits have to broaden to include things that were not previously considered benefits. Things like the working environment, things like diversity, and things like learning and development opportunities. I also asked them, were there any types of company that you would not want to work for? And they replied, animal testing. Any company that has unethical practices, because I wouldn't be able to bring myself to agree with or support them. Companies that are too controversial, for example, too closely associated with politics. So this is becoming very important. Companies' social purpose and ethics, and people know with all that technology exactly what companies are doing out there. They can see the news happening as it happens. And so companies have got to be very much more conscious about what their social purpose is and what they're giving back into their communities as well as their core business. I then asked people, when you started work, how much did you understand about things like pensions and share schemes, and were you interested? And they answered, well, we didn't know very much. I was interested, it could help me in the future. Not really, just basic stuff, very little, didn't understand much, but I would have been interested. And I started work at 18 and never had any understanding of it. So again, this is becoming very important. There's a lot of information out there about things on the internet, but they need help to actually disseminate it and understand it. I asked them, how did you feel about the ability for young people to get onto the property ladder? And they said to me, well, I'd love to buy, but I can't afford it on my own. It's difficult without having a good credit score or having enough savings. I've got university debt. The main struggle is to save the appropriate amount for a deposit. It's difficult if people don't have the luxury of parents' help, and I couldn't have done it without help from my family. So companies that can help employees with financial support and really give them some information about some of these key things are going to differentiate themselves. I asked them whether they got any financial education at school, and they said no, barely, only student finance, no, none, nothing that I can remember. So again, help on understanding financial issues is a very important benefit. And finally, I said to them, what other issues concern you? And they said global warming, air pollution, never being on the property ladder, money, global politics, global warming and climate change. So again, employees are very aware of some of these issues, and those companies that can differentiate themselves in these areas are going to make a real difference. So at Hayes, we organise our benefits into 5 key well-being areas. The first is around our health, and this covers both physical and mental emotional health. And you can see on this slide the sort of things that we offer. Outside of the benefits, we also have a lot of health information, and we participate in things like walking challenges and competitions between officers. We have money, and so worries are one of the biggest causes of stress and can lead to time off work. So we organise our money into short, medium and long-term savings. And recently we introduced an employee loan scheme, so employees can take out loans to have rental deposits or to consolidate their debt. We've signed up with a housing company to try and offer housing opportunities to our employees, and we're about to launch an employee savings plan direct from payroll. We look at life, and that's our work-life balance, but this also incorporates all our corporate social responsibilities and charity activities, so that employees have the opportunity to give back to the communities in which they work and to support the causes that are important to them. And in there, we have flexible working, which is one of the most important employee benefits that you see in all the surveys. And finally, we have two pillars of well-being. One is the environment, and this is our working environment, and that doesn't just mean health and safety. This is all about working with your colleagues and your managers, our culture and our values, our approach to diversity and inclusion and equality. And we have learning and development, because everybody wants to learn and reach their potential. And so we have on-the-job learning, we have training courses, and we have the ability to work internationally and grow people's international experience. These two areas, environment and learning and development, are not always considered traditional benefits and very often sit on different areas of the intranet or people's different responsibilities. But actually, when you choose a company to work for, you're choosing a lifestyle. And these two boxes are often the catalysts for employees looking to leave a company. For example, they've fallen out with their manager, they don't like the values and culture of the company, and they can't have job fulfillment or career progression. So these are important areas to look at in order to try and differentiate yourselves. And there are other things that you can do to be imaginative, and these don't cost an awful lot of money. So first of all, as I did, walk the floor and go and talk to your employees about what's important to them. When it comes to communication, at Hays we have over 90 officers, as Karen said, so it is a challenge to communicate with everybody, and so it needs to be thought through. And I always think that for difficult things to communicate, complex things like pension, as far as possible it should be done face-to-face, but the actual administration of those benefits should be made as easy as possible, and that's where technology comes in. Try to make your benefits real, organise them into logical groups, cut out the jargon, let employees tell their stories, and have lunch and learn sessions. And try new things. For example, I once ran a project to live off the base state pension for a week. I called for volunteers for employees to live off £70, £10 a day, and make sure that they actually spent up on everything, getting your hair cut, eating, going out. And we looked at how they felt, whether they could eat healthily, how they felt emotionally, and that really puts it in perspective that if you don't save for your pension, this is what it could be like when you come to retire. And seek out new benefits. There are lots now coming on the market that are a little bit different and a little bit more quirky than before, and that actually can help employees in different ways. You can use existing resources. For example, the Money Advice Service has an excellent website with lots of really clear information about money matters. And you can tie communication into other events. So, for example, we try and tie our communication on finance into weeks where we're specialising in certain types of jobs. So, some final words here. First of all, you don't need a big budget in order to get out and do some of these things. Talk to people, it's so important. Be creative, be curious and think outside the box. And be brave about it, because some of these things are really not rocket science and can be done very straightforwardly. And you don't need to do everything at once. You can pick some low-hanging fruit and try and pick the things that have the highest impact and can reach the most employees. And I know that you all have Karen as your contact, but if anybody would like to talk to me afterwards, please do ask Karen, and I'd be very pleased to talk to you more about the things that we do at Hays. Karen, thank you very much.
Thank you, Rosemary. Really insightful, and I think some good practical tips there, as well as helping us to think about the different types of people in our organisation and indeed the different generations and the stretch that we're going to see over the years to come. So I'll now open the floor to any questions. Just a reminder, if you've got questions, to use the Q&A box, which is on the webinar technology. A number of you have contacted with regards to will a copy of the slides be available? So if you want to contact me afterwards directly, it's Karen, Karen.Young, Young, @hays.com. Very happy to arrange copies of the slides for you. I think we've got one or two that have come through. Here's a crux one. Do you expect salaries to continue to rise next year? Well, that's the key question, isn't it? I think you know, looking at our sort of survey piece, despite this ongoing market uncertainty and Brexit and everything else going on, our survey did indicate 77% of accountancy and finance employers plan to raise salaries in the year ahead, and I think the skills shortages piece is going to continue to be prevalent. So it's probably inevitable that salaries will continue to rise in some of the most in-demand functions and job roles. So that there's always pressure within the recently qualified piece. Be interested to see if we continue to see the movement in the transactional finance piece, and I think that the financial controller as well. But if you've got to get the best talent, you have got to factor these things in. But it still is that reminder that it's not the only important factor for people. It's career progression, it's career path, it's work-life balance also playing a key role here, and considering that full package. Rosemary, I'm sure you probably add something additional to that from a reward perspective.
Yes, absolutely, Karen. I agree. And I think this is where talking about total reward is really important, because the value of the benefits can make a huge difference to the overall perception of the package offered. And it's where you need to be imaginative about the sort of things that you can offer. I think flexible working is a really big benefit for people and comes up time and time again. And the good thing about accountancy and finance roles is that they're potentially easier for somebody to work remotely and therefore more flexibly.
Yeah, a very good point. And actually, I've heard of quite a few examples of that beginning to happen more, where departments have been piloting and trying out agile working for their team and their function, and it's interesting because it's brought up different challenges through that pilot or test phase than perhaps what they envisaged at the start of that. So one particular organisation looked to do it because they were thinking ahead about the generation and the skill sets that they were needing to attract in the future, and they said if we don't do this, the risk is too great because we won't get the skills into the business that we need. And then as the pilot started, they realised that actually not everyone likes the idea of agile working, and some people do genuinely want to come into the office every day that they came in before and have a more consistent experience and that sort of social interaction, and that they do feel that they can then leave their work behind them when they leave the office. And again, it's the kind of one size doesn't fit all piece that I think, Rosemary, you mentioned earlier. So some kind of learned along the way from those pilot pieces as well. I think what we've got here, so with such acute skills shortages, what can employers do to attract the candidates that we need? Well, yes, there's widespread skill shortages as we've highlighted, and personally I feel, well, there's a number of things here. Creating that strong employer brand can really help your organisation to stand out from the competition. If you've not come across it before, we produced a report called What Workers Want, and this is our second annual report this year, and that was actually a very practical look into, if people are applying for a job, what are the things that will make them stay in a recruitment process or potentially dip out, and it talks about the 4 key stages. And a real practical example would be that if an online recruitment process takes too long, there's a point at which over 50% of people said I'd dip out that if I couldn't save where I'd got to, and then the doorbell goes, or I've got to take the dog out, or whatever's going on in life, I probably wouldn't go back to it. So are you prepared to miss out on some of those excellent candidates through sort of lack of a great process in your recruitment process? And I think also the employer brand bit, helping to stand out and appeal to a wider audience of prospective candidates, links into what I mentioned earlier around tapping into the widest pool of talent possible, and looking at, if you're going to do that, you've got to look at people from across all sorts of different generations, and therefore you do need to tailor your attraction strategy. So I'm not generalising too much, but a baby boomer may place a much higher value on location and work-life balance than a Generation Z candidate, for example. So I think it's evaluating what's important to the people you hope to attract and ensuring that your employee value proposition clearly promotes this. Again, I'd call on you, Rosemary, for any additional comments.
I agree, Karen. I'm just seeing a question come up as well that says, is there a good opportunity for the older worker in the finance field if work past the age of 65, and I think that there are excellent opportunities out there because older workers have, lots of experience. I think 65 is no longer old, I don't think, and I think there's plenty of opportunities, but people have got to be a little bit more flexible in looking at how they can upskill people and keep those people engaged. But I think there's plenty of opportunities for people out there.
And that's interesting because I think it's just one of the others, there's quite a few questions flooding through now, so we'll try and take as many as we can. But one here, if most of the accountancy and finance roles will be made automatic within the next few years, what can we do to help our employees now to prepare for no employment, let's hope not, stroke reskill, but still keep them engaged in their position now? Well, I mean, I do think it's interesting. October was very much the conference season for accountancy and finance and for various different institutes, and I don't think there was a conference in any part of the UK that I went to where the robots are coming wasn't on the agenda in some part. But interestingly, I mean, we're quite a good kind of indicator of this at Hays with the volume of vacancies that get registered with us across all the different professional disciplines. And Rosemary mentioned a few jobs that didn't exist, even just a handful of years ago. There are jobs like that in finance, but typically I don't think it's moving at the same pace as, for example, my colleagues in our digital tech space and digital marketing. Things are starting to change, though. So an example would be, I don't think we don't see as many cash allocation positions registered in large businesses as we were, but we are seeing more credit risk analysts. Now, the interesting piece in that is obviously, to answer the question, development of more analytical skills, perhaps more cognitive thinking, collaboration, critical thinking. These are all skill sets that are going to come into play. And I'd argue that sort of the analytical and the thinking and the creativity bit will become more important even if the robots are doing some of the jobs, because the good news about it, in my view, is that I do think it will create new jobs that are more value add. And the value add jobs, if you're paying 22, 23, 24K in a cash allocation role, if you reskill someone and enable them to become a credit risk analyst, for example, they're going to be looking at something probably 30K plus. So there's good news in that for people. But I've actually got a little bit of a piece on that and a blog. So if people link in with me, I'll share that as well over the next few weeks. Would you add anything, Rosemary, on that, just in terms of preparing for reskilling from an L&D perspective?
I'm completely with you, Caroline. I think the joy of some of the AI that's coming in is going to take the routine things away from people and actually free them up to be more human and to actually go out and work with the business. And it's actually a positive thing. I think new jobs created and jobs will change, but the human aspect is the thing that's going to become really important, and robots can't take that over.
And I think, sorry, just to go back to the question around people working past 65. I mean, it's been interesting in a number of our surveys, DNA of a finance director and what's challenging finance leaders, that generally from the finance director and CFO community, their general expectation is that they'll be working well past 60, and probably most of us will. But it's the bit that Rosemary referred to earlier about how long people will be in the world of work for, and working as we know work now, I don't personally feel will be sustainable, and people will take breaks at different times. And it might be that that gap year that historically some people take between school and, say, a university degree becomes a gap 2 years in your early mid-50s, for example. So I think there is opportunity. And I think there's opportunity. I think it was Shell a number of years ago at a presentation, and they spoke about how they used their very experienced people that didn't want to work full time anymore to act as, if you like, mentors to obviously staff coming through the organisation, and that would be more on a sort of consultancy basis. There's all sorts of directions it can take, but I think there'll be plenty of opportunity for the older worker in the finance field to answer that question. And I think the final one that we probably can take in the interest of time, what can employers do if we're not able to increase salaries? We often at our organisation encounter candidates with much higher salary requests than we can match. Well, hopefully some of the things we've spoken about over the webinar will help you have some ideas to take away. I've just spotted a comment from someone that said they've got lots of different ideas to take back to their HR department. But one thing, you're not alone, and I think that's quite nice to know. know that. I think it's looking close at your overall offering again, and not just the financial elements. For me, the ability to show and demonstrate what sort of career path someone can have with your organisation, showcasing real life people that have gone on and done something different and where they've gone to with the organisation, and bringing those people into the interview process. For me, that and showing that you can promote medium to long-term career opportunities, and the importance that you put as an organisation onto that, both professional development but also personal development, is massive. And I think we underestimate the work-life balance bit. Certainly employers do, and our survey, every time we survey people on this, it highlights this mismatch between how important employees rate it and how employers perceive this aspect. So if you don't have anything in place, I would urge you to go off and have a think about that. And Rosemary, do you want to give a closing comment on that?
Well, I think the importance of total reward and the value of all the benefits that you offer is a way to show the increased value of the package. It's not just about base salary, but I think all the things that Karen has mentioned about when you choose a company or choosing a lifestyle, and if that can enhance your life outside of work, I think that's actually worth an awful lot of money to a lot of people. It's not just about the cash in the pocket, it's about how much time they can spend with their families, how their career progresses, maybe even laterally, and how they can develop personally. So I think while money does play a very important role because people have to live, there are a lot of other things that can go around the package that can attract people to you.
Thank you, Rosemary. So I'm afraid in the interest of time, we'll have to draw things to a close. I hope you found today a useful insight, not only into a snapshot into the salaries, but also how the UK economy, employment and recruitment are faring. And I'd also like to extend my thanks once again to Rosemary, providing an excellent thought-provoking presentation, and of course to you all for joining us. So if you're looking for a bit more in the detail and you'd like to request a copy of the guide, please either speak to your usual Hayes contact, or you can contact myself, or complete the form on our web page. So you can see, I think, the address in front of you, hayes.co.uk/salary-guide. We'd be delighted, of course, to help you look in more detail at what help your organisation might need over the coming year. Not just about the salaries, about the attraction piece, looking at your recruitment process, those online forms. And Rosemary, thank you very much for your kind offer, of course, to engage with people as well if there's something specific on the overall rewards piece. So thank you very much. Have a good afternoon and goodbye.